I so deserve a treat. I'll start on Monday. I'm too tired to cook. Let's just order in. I've already blown it today. Might as well eat it. Do any of these sound familiar? These aren't just thoughts, right? They're triggers, and they're the real triggers of your habits. And today, I'm going to show you how these thoughts actually work and why they have so much power over you. Welcome to Happy and Healthy with Amy, the brain health podcast for women in midlife who want to not just survive, but actually thrive during the menopause transition and beyond. I'm Amy Lang, master health coach, best-selling author, and daughter of Alzheimer's, and I'm here to help you make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Well, hi there, Amy here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome back to another episode of Happy and Healthy with Amy. Over the last 2 episodes, we've covered a lot of ground. In part 1, I showed you why, when it comes to long-term health goals, you can't design for the outcomes, only the behaviors. And we walked through the stages of change and some of the barriers that are part of each one. In part 2, I introduced the behavior formula, B equals MAP. And we talked about the rider, elephant, and path metaphor. Right? We talked about how the elephant is really your emotional brain, right? 6 tons of feelings and habits and the need for comfort right now. Well, as promised, today we're spending time with the elephant. I'm going to show you what the real trigger for your habits actually is and why it's not the external cue, why these thoughts have so much power over you, and why fighting them doesn't work. And then next week in part 4, the last episode of this series that started out as a 2-parter, okay, we're going to talk about what's actually happening in your brain so you can understand how to work with your elephant instead of against it. Okay? Because here's what I've learned after years of coaching and also lived experience. You can't force the elephant, but you can learn to speak its language. Now, most habit frameworks talk about the habit loop. This is from the book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, right? It goes the cue, the routine, and then the reward. So something in your environment cues you, right? You do the behavior, the routine, and you get the reward. And in the book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, he identified 5 types of cues that can trigger a behavior. Time of day, your location, your emotional state, other people around you, and the action that immediately preceded it. And these are helpful to know, but here's what I want you to notice. There's a step between the cue and the routine that most frameworks gloss over, right? James Clear calls it a craving, the emotional force behind the habit, the anticipation of the reward. But I want you to get more specific because that craving, it shows up as a thought first, right? Your thoughts are the real triggers of your habits. You walk past the break room. There are donuts on the table. That's the external cue. But you don't just automatically eat a donut, right? First, a thought fires like, ooh, donuts, yummy, and I haven't had breakfast yet. It'll go great with my coffee. I'll just have one, right? That thought is the real trigger. Right? The donut didn't make you eat it. The thought did. and the feeling you get from the thought. The neurotransmitters that come with it is what you crave. Or you're lying in bed, the alarm goes off, right? That's, again, the external cue. But you don't just automatically get up or hit the snooze. First, a thought fires. I'm so tired. Just 5 more minutes. I don't feel like working out, right? That thought is the real trigger for hitting the snooze button. Or you're at a restaurant and the server asks you if you want dessert. That's the external cue, right? And then a thought fires. I'm already full, but it's a special occasion, right? Someone's birthday. That thought is the real trigger for ordering the cake, right? The external cue activates a thought, and then the thought triggers the routine, along with that anticipation of what the dessert tastes like, especially if you've been to this place before. And this is actually good news, because while you can't always control the external cues, right? You see donuts, you hear alarms, you get offered dessert. But there's a space between the cue and your response, right? That's where the thought lives. And that's where your real leverage is. But not all of these thoughts lead to comfort seeking, right? Some trigger something darker. You step on the scale and you see a number. That's the external cue. And a series of thoughts fire. I need to lose weight. My clothes don't fit. Why can't I stay on track? What's wrong with me? Right? Those thoughts don't lead to eating a donut. They trigger your brain's threat response. Your amygdala, right? Your brain's alarm system fires. And stress hormones like cortisol flood your system. And the rider, right, the rational part of your brain that could make a good decision, it gets hijacked, right? It goes offline. And now you're in shame. And you can't think clearly. And then a second series of thoughts fire. One that offer escape from the pain. What's the point? Why bother to keep trying? I might as well eat what I want. Right? That's a rescue thought. It's seeking relief from the threat state the first thoughts created. Right? So sometimes the path looks like this. External cue leads to a threat thought, which leads to a shame spiral, which leads to an escape thought, which leads to the routine, which leads to the reward, which is relief. And this is why self-criticism is so destructive. That harsh voice in your head does motivate you in the short term, right? It triggers threat. And threat triggers the need to escape, which often leads right back to the behavior, to the very behavior you were trying to avoid. So you think you're being tough on yourself to create change, but you're actually creating the brain state that leads to the elephant taking over. Now, I don't want you to despair, because here's the empowering truth. You may not be able to control that first thought, right? It's automatic and it fires before you even know what's happening. That's often how habits work, right? The basal ganglia doesn't wait for or ask for permission. You see the donuts and I deserve a treat, right? Is the first thought that fires. Or you step on the scale and I need to lose weight fires, right? That's not a choice. That's years of neural wiring doing its thing. But you are not powerless. As a matter of fact, what I'm about to share with you is a skill that, when you master it, will be life-changing. Right? And that is this. Once you become aware of the thought, you can choose where to direct your mind. Again, the first thought is automatic, right? We don't get to choose it. But once you can become aware of it, you can insert a pause. And that's the space Viktor Frankl was talking about in his famous quote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." So you can't stop the first thought from arriving, but you can choose what you do with it. You can choose where your mind goes. And that, my friend, changes everything. All right? So here's what most people don't understand about that first series of thoughts. They come with a built-in reward. Okay, think about what happens the moment the thought, "I'll start on Monday," crosses your mind. Right? The pressure lifts. You feel relief. You don't have to do the hard thing right now. Right? That relief, that's a reward. Your brain just learned this thought equals relief. Phew, I can stay in my comfort zone. Or I deserve a treat. Right? The moment you think it, you feel a little surge of self-compassion, permission, comfort. You're taking care of yourself. And that feeling, that's a reward, right? Before you've even eaten the treat. Or one glass of wine won't hurt, right? Or another martini. Instantly, you feel some social ease. You're fitting in. You're not the difficult one. And that feeling of belonging, social connection, right? We need that. And that's a huge reward. So I want you to remember this. All behavior, whether your choice is to do something or not do something, has a payoff. And in these examples, here's what's beneath the surface. The thought itself delivers a reward before you even take the action. And your brain learns this thought leads to relief. This thought leads to comfort. This thought leads to permission. Right? So the next time you're in a similar situation, the thought fires automatically because it's been reinforced, because it's become a habit. Right? This is why I say thoughts are habits too. They're not random. Right? They follow the same habit loop as any other behavior. Cue, routine, reward. And the reward is the feeling the thought creates. So when you try to change a habit, whether it's to form a new one or break an old one, more than likely you're competing with your brain's reward system. So let me show you how this works with one thought, or some version of this thought that you've probably had 1,000 times. I deserve a treat. Right? We'll take a deep dive. All right? Let's unpack it. Let's peel back the layers of the onion. Okay? You've had a long day and you're tired and you walk into the kitchen and you see a plate of cookies on the counter. Right? That's, again, the external cue. And instantly the thought fires, I so deserve a treat, right? It's been a long, busy, stressful day. So notice what just happened. The thought didn't ask permission, it just arrived, right? That's the automatic first thought. Now notice what the thought gives you. Right? The moment it fires, you feel a little lift. permission, self-compassion. I've been working hard. I deserve something nice. That feeling is the reward. And you got it before you even touched the cookie. Your brain just learned this thought feels good. So the next time you're tired and you see something tempting, the same thought will fire because it worked, right? It delivered relief. This is why I deserve a treat is so hard to argue with. You're not just fighting a thought. You're fighting a reward that's already been delivered. And as a side note, chances are your insulin levels have also risen in anticipation of eating that cookie. So this is in preparation of the incoming glucose and to prevent a massive glucose spike in your bloodstream, right? Thanks to cues like sight, smell, and thoughts of the cookie. All right, now let's look at a different kind of thought. One that doesn't feel like a reward at all. And the thoughts that I'm talking about are ones like, I need to lose weight. My clothes don't fit, right? Why can't I stay on track? What's wrong with me? Why can't I figure this out? Right? None of these thoughts feel good. Actually, it's worse than that, right? They feel terrible. So why then does your brain keep generating them? Right? It's trying to protect you. So because your brain has a negativity bias, it's constantly looking for threats. And if you factor in diet culture that has told us what's considered acceptable, your brain is now trying to use fear and shame to motivate you, right? It's trying to threaten you into action. Unfortunately, what actually winds up happening is that the thought triggers your amygdala, right? Your brain's threat detector. And then stress hormones flood your system. And your prefrontal cortex, which is the rider, again, starts to go offline. It gets hijacked. So now you're flooded with shame. You can't think clearly. And your brain desperately now wants to escape this feeling. Right? So then a second series of thoughts fire. Like, what's the point? I've already failed. I might as well eat the rest of the plate of cookies. Right? That's the escape thought. It's offering relief from the threat state that the first series of thoughts created. Right? And now you're reaching for the food you were trying to avoid. But it's not because you're weak. It's because your brain created a shame spiral and then offered you the only exit it knew. And this is why self-criticism backfires. It doesn't motivate for long-term health, right? It creates the exact brain state that leads to the behavior you're trying to change. So those are the two primary paths: reward seeking and threat activating, right? Or pain avoidance. So here are some other common elephant thoughts. I want you to see if any of them sound familiar. I'll start on Monday, right? The reward is relief from having to act now. One bite won't hurt, or everything in moderation, right? The reward is permission without guilt. I'm too tired. The reward is rest, self-compassion. I've already blown it today. The reward is permission to quit. Right? Don't tell me what to eat. The reward is autonomy and control. Or the opposite, I have no self-control. This one's a threat thought, right? It triggers shame. So you don't need to memorize these, okay? I just want you to recognize which ones you have, right? What thoughts fire for you that when you encounter an external cue, right? What reward or what threat do they deliver? And that awareness is the first step. All right. So in those instances when people do notice these thoughts, what do most people do? Right? They try to fight them. They argue with themselves or they negotiate. No, I shouldn't eat this cookie. Or when it comes to a workout, even if I'm tired, I need to suck it up and do it anyway. And sometimes the rider does win for a minute or an hour or maybe even a day. Right? That's willpower. But here's the problem. Every time the rider argues with the elephant, the rider gets a little more tired. And the elephant? The elephant has unlimited energy for what it wants. And this is why you run out of willpower, right? Especially at the end of the day, or if you're hungry or stressed out or sleep deprived. So you're not weak. It's just not a fair fight, right? And then there's one other problem. When you fight a thought, you often make it stronger. So if you tell yourself, don't think about the cookies, what are you thinking about? The cookies, right? We know this from Daniel Wegman's work on thought suppression, that it doesn't work, that what you resist persists. So if fighting doesn't work, what does? Well, that's what we'll be covering in the next episode, right? I'm going to show you what your brain actually needs to change. And it's a simple 3-step process to work with your elephant instead of against it. So for this week, what I'd like you to do is something very simple. It may actually be the simplest challenge that I've ever given you. All right? I want you to just notice, like pick one behavior you're working on, right? Whether it's eating or movement or sleep. And this week, just practice catching the elephant thoughts when they arrive. I don't want you to try to fix them, right? And I don't want you to fight them. You don't have to do anything with them or about them. I just want you to notice, oh, that's an elephant thought. That's it. Awareness first. Action comes next week. So, if there's only one thing you take away from this episode, it's this. The first thought is automatic. But the second thought, that can be a choice. And noticing is how you get to that choice. All right? So, of course, I would love to hear from you, right? What elephant thoughts did you catch this week? And what patterns are you starting to see? So you can send me an email or you can message me on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, right? Or comment on YouTube. So send me an email or message me on Instagram or Facebook, right? I make a point to reply to every single message, okay? And if you're finding it hard to do this on your own, I want you to know I am here for you, right? This is exactly what coaching is for. So if you'd like to schedule a session with me, just go to moxie-club.com and then there's a link for programs where it says work with Amy, right? Seriously, it can be really hard for you to hear your own elephant voice, that inner critic. Okay? You can hear other people's, but not your own. So you've been listening to it for a long time, right? Again, it's just playing in the background like a soundtrack. So again, awareness is the first step. And in some ways, it's the hardest step. So next week, again, we're going to talk about how to actually redirect the elephant. But you really do need to be aware of when the elephant's trying to get your attention first. All right? So as a little preview for the next episode, I'm going to wrap things up today with a quote by Michael Singer. The day you decide that you are more interested in being aware of your thoughts than you are in the thoughts themselves, that is the day you will find your way out.